You back in time, Mr. Speaker, in history, 71 years to today, literally 71 years to today. And what did we see in the newsreels? And that was that Lord Chamberlain waved a stack of papers in front of the camera, and he uttered, "We have peace of our time." And what was he talking about? He had just come from a meeting with Herr Adolf Hitler, and they had, along with France and a few other nations, but not Czechoslovakia, they had come to an agreement to cede to Hitler the Sudetenland, which is the, at that time, was the strategic part of Czechoslovakia that was so necessary for their protection. He ceded that. Of course, Hitler claimed that it was mostly populated with Germans, but nonetheless, Lord Chamberlain and others agreed to let him have it. And we know that today as a policy of appeasement. He also said that he came back, or he actually went there for the purpose of honor and peace. And then Winston Churchill, who was in the Parliament, replied that he went there for honor and peace, but he returned with neither. Because we know that within months, Hitler began a very aggressive campaign and went on to, of course, not only take Czechoslovakia, but also Poland. And, of course, as we say, the rest is history. And what is that history? The history is that there were 20 million people killed during World War II, Mr. Speaker. 6 million of them were Jews. And in visiting the Holocaust Museum in Israel, in Jerusalem, Yad Shahim, it was something very interesting, I think, occurred in my mind that I had never thought about until it was brought out. You know, we saw a lot of very interesting things there, a lot of personal stories about families who were broken apart, most of whom died in the Holocaust, people who were in death camps, a lot of personal letters and books and eyeglasses and things like that that told individual stories. We know the factual parts of this. We've all seen the documentaries that talked about the gas chambers and the ovens, and we, of course, have heard about and read about the final solution and Hitler's attempt to take executing human beings to a whole new scientific level, which he was able to achieve. Nothing before and nothing since has been done. But you know, the important thing, Mr. Speaker, about this that we must understand that really teaches us a second lesson today, the first one being the danger of appeasement, but the second is that while the Jews were being carted off to the death camps, and of course many of them attempted to reach safe harbor in the United States and many other countries and were denied that, and in fact in many cases were thrown out of other countries, there was no one to speak up for the Jews. No one, not even the United States. Even we have the blight of having turned our backs on the Jews. And there was no state, there was no country to speak up for the Jews who at that time lived in many places of the world. And because of that, after World War II and all the countries began to come together, it was decided that the Jews would have their own homeland. And of course, we know that the UN provided for that, and what was then called Palestine today is called Israel. Israel is a state, and that's so important because now the Jews have a country to stick up for them. They have a people who will never back down from an evil dictator like Adolf Hitler. They will stand up for their people, and they will stand up as our ally against these things. But, you know, the interesting thing is it's often said that what we don't learn from history is destined to repeat itself. And what we have today is a Hitler-like figure, Mr. Speaker. Of course, Ahmadinejad, who is saying many of the very same things that Adolf Hitler said in those days, giving the same threats. You know, very few people took Hitler seriously when he said that he intended to kill the Jews. And yet that's precisely what he did. And now we have today Ahmadinejad, who is making the same statements, and we watch before our very eyes he's building a nuclear arsenal. And what are we doing, Mr. Speaker? Well, we're talking about sanctions. And how effective are these sanctions going to be when it's necessary to have Russia and China to help us with that? And, of course, all we're getting from them is rhetoric. In fact, the only thing structurally that's been done in all of this discussion is we've given up missile defense in the Czech Republic and in Poland. So we're already beginning the appeasement process in this world, while we have another Hitler-like figure out there beginning to plan the destruction of the Jews once again. And so I think we need to stand, Mr. Speaker, with our brothers and sisters in Israel, in their protection, because inasmuch as Israel is so capable of taking care of itself, we all know just what a small strip of land that is. And while Israel can protect itself in many ways, there's no way that Israel can protect itself from an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead, and that is precisely what Iran is doing today. And apart from that, Iran is exporting terrorism around the world. We know that Hamas and Hezbollah, we know that Al-Qaeda, who is providing Al-Qaeda, Mr. Speaker, with the weapons that they're using to kill our own sons and daughters. Again, it's Iran. So Iran is emerging as, I guess, Ahmadinejad and certainly the mullahs behind him are really, I think, showing a tremendous parallel to pre-World War II Germany. And I think that we need to learn from the lessons of the past, and that is that, number one, we should never allow a policy of appeasement. It never gives peace and it never gives honor. It always leads to war. It's always a matter of people overseas, folks who really are out for the destruction of others. It gives them an opening to attack other countries. And then secondly, that never again should Israel be without its own country, and certainly without its friends around the world. Never again should we have a situation, Mr. Speaker, as we did during World War II, that was a Holocaust, which of course we know that Ahmadinejad denies to this day. And, you know, there are many that say, look, this is just a little strip of land out there in the middle of the desert. You've got Arabs out there and you've got Jews and they're fighting over this little land. Really, if you think about it, the Jews occupied this land as far back as 3500 BC. Islam didn't even come into existence until thousands of years later. In fact, we know that Christianity started even before Islam. So, of course, there's been three major religions that have existed there and still exist there today, and as far as I'm concerned, they can exist forever. But I think that there's no reason to think that there isn't a legitimate right for Israel to claim that as its own state. And in summary, and in this to kind of, I think, tie it all together, Mr. Speaker, we talked about the issue of the two-state solution. And Mr. Netanyahu believes that that is the way to go. We should have two states, a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. But remember that Israel is a democracy. And just simply by being outgrown by Palestinians or Muslims, it could lose its status as a Jewish state. And I think that it's essential that we not only support this two-state solution in supporting Israel, but that we support the right for Israel to exist as a Jewish state, and always will. So with that, I will
well, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Yes,
Actually, both my colleagues when we were there, we had an opportunity to visit a number of the settlements. And I've been distressed that our president, President Obama, has been almost dictating that Israel give up part of its sovereign nation, these settlements. We were there. We walked them. We saw the strategic location of them. And I wanted to get your impressions of what your thoughts were. Should Israel be give in to that direction and give up its sovereign land, those settlements that it has today?
Well, if the gentleman will yield back, I would just simply say that my first impression, beyond the fact that Israel is such a lovely country, I mean, it's just gorgeous, right in the middle of the desert, next to the Mediterranean Sea, and of course we were able to see the Dead Sea, and of course many sites that are holy to us as Christians. But just how small that country is, like a postage stamp, as narrow as 5 miles at its waist. And we saw a patchwork of villages, one being a Palestinian, one being Jewish, all throughout the country. And even though often cases there were checkpoints and there were fences between them, you couldn't really see that. All you could see looking over is you would see evidence of a Palestinian village and you would see evidence of a Jewish village, all sitting there peacefully. It's almost difficult to believe how much war and how much violence has existed there for so long. And of course, with that, we visited Sderot, which is, I guess, a flashpoint where there's been rockets hurled and that sort of thing. So I think, you know, that was really what I found to be very impressive.
Does the gentleman yield again?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, it struck me that I mean, many of those settlements are strategic locations. They're high ground from which terrorists, the Palestinians, lobbed missiles and rockets onto the men, women, and children of Israel, and those were taken as a part of a war, I believe, in '48, and frankly, they're extremely important areas to hold on to. I kind of think of as I think about our president, President Obama, dictating to the Israeli nation that they should give up this space. It's a little bit like somebody coming to us and say, okay, now you need to give back New Mexico, California, and Nevada to the sovereign nation of Mexico. We wouldn't stand for that. I would certainly hope that the sovereign Jewish nation of Israel would not stand for that as well.
Would the gentleman yield?
Please.
You know, to your point, I think what you're suggesting is, number one, should any of these properties be, quote, given back or surrendered? But number two, should that really be the focus of our effort towards peace? It seems to me a little disingenuous on the part of our administration to suggest that somehow what stands between the current situation and a path road to peace is the issue of settlements is really a misnomer. The reality is the State of Israel has shown throughout their short history that they are the ones who have bargained in good faith and time again shown a willingness to give up lands as they have, and only to their own peril. As you mentioned, what you saw in Sderot with the bomb shelters and the people who have suffered as a result of them giving up the Gaza Strip. But the issue of Israel really willing to give up this settlement or that settlement or redraw the boundaries, you and I both heard from Mr. Netanyahu's own words that they're not wedded to any set boundary. But what we also heard was out of the lips of the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, which was his unwillingness to accept Israel as a Jewish state. And therein lies the real problem with a pathway to peace and a two-state solution, is the Palestinians' unwillingness at this point to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. I'd only also add that while we're talking about settlements, Iran continues to march towards acquiring a nuclear weapon. And while I certainly respect this administration's plan to begin talks and to negotiate and to try and solve this diplomatically, I would remind the American people and my colleagues here that this is the same administration who we want to talk to that has lied to the international community and hidden from them a nuclear facility which the world was just made aware of just last week. And so I would only question the sincerity and the ability for us to truly negotiate with trust with this regime who, up until last weekend, we were not even aware of an additional nuclear facility. So it's very alarming. I will tell you, I don't know what my distinguished colleagues here feel, but you know, we have two bills that are still in this chamber. House Resolution 2194, which is the Iran Refined Petroleum Sanctions Act, and then the Iran Sanctions Enabling Act, which was House Resolution 1327. Both of those bills have a majority of members of Congress supporting it. And it just seems to me a shame that this body has not acted on that legislation to put another tool in the chest of President Obama as he goes forward to negotiate with Iran, the fact that these sanctions are there if and when they become necessary to use. And I would just yield back.
So I thank the gentleman. I certainly I thank you for naming those pieces of legislation. They're extremely important. They do have the large support of this entire chamber. And I would ask the Speaker's support to bring that bill to the floor so that we can do the right thing by this most important ally that we have in the Middle East, and would serve the needs. I think what you've talked about tonight really most recently addresses the most immediate threat in Israel, and I think the most immediate threat to the United States, and that is the situation in Iran. You know, Mr. Speaker, Iran has recently revealed the development of a secret nuclear facility. And Iran's admission of the operations of a secret nuclear facility is a serious problem and a serious threat. And while this new revelation is alarming, it's not unexpected. Iran has deceived the world time and time again. And any attempts to assure the world that their nuclear program is peaceful should be seen for what it is, and that's just another lie. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's time to impose meaningful sanctions on the Iranian government. We have legislation that has been drafted and introduced and has the support of the majority members of this chamber. And we must not continue a foreign policy that extends a hand of cooperation to our enemies while that they continue dangerous acts of deception. If the nuclear facility was designed for civilian purposes, we have to ask, why did Iran conceal its existence? Now, we must impose meaningful sanctions on a threat that endangers the safety of American citizens and America's allies. Now, the confirmation of this secret nuclear facility is troubling, especially to me at a time just days after the Obama administration announced plans to abandon the placement of a missile defense system in the Czech Republic and Poland, all because Russia was not happy with the idea. Only a year since Russia invaded Georgia, and 70 years to the day since the Soviet Union invaded Poland, the administration has announced the dismantling of one of our most important missile defense systems at the expense of our allies. Mr. Speaker, the abandonment of the European missile defense site, which could have protected the homeland of the United States against Iranian long-range missiles, is unacceptable. As I was talking with one of the chairs of our Missile Defense Caucus in this body, he described to me that we do have, there is a plans for a better system to be put in place. However, that new missile defense program will not be operational till 2018 or 2020. And that while we do have other missile defense shields in place that will remain, he described it like this: it's like trying to bring down an airplane with a baseball. He supposed it could be possible, but it's a 1 in a million chance. When we think of intercontinental ballistic missiles that travel at a speed of 10,000 miles per hour, to me it's unacceptable at this point in time in our history when we have threats that are sometimes come from other countries, such as Iran, sometimes from terrorists that hold no national identity. And it's alarming to me that we're taking down this missile defense
Would the gentleman
program.
yield on
Please.
that point? Yeah,